Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Ottawa South.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good morning as well to you, Madam Speaker, after a marathon of debate and voting in the last 30 hours. I'd like to focus on some of the practical, everyday aspects and impacts of this legislation, which we will not be supporting in the Liberal Party of Canada. A few things for viewers and people reading these transcripts who might want to know is this is a carbon copy of a previous bill which has been brought into the House. It's the old C-32 copyright bill. Fact number two, the government has rejected and refused to amend this bill in any way, any shape, any form, either through legislative amendments put by parties or based on the sound evidence and testimony given by folks who deal with this sector on a day-in, day-out basis. Let's just take a look at some of the recent testimony we've heard just in the last 7 days at Industry Committee, Madam Speaker. And it deals with this question of digital locks, which, as my colleague has just raised, would say to a family, say to a housewife or father or single mom or dad putting a kid into a car for a soccer tournament, you cannot copy that film to be able to play it on the 8-hour car ride to Windsor, for example. You can't copy it because if you do, you're going to be subject to prosecution. Well, here are a couple of other elements. We heard, for example, from the CEO of UBM Tech Insights. This is an Ottawa-based company, and they are a world-class company, Madam Speaker. Their job is to protect intellectual property for creators and owners. They're sort of like a CSI crime lab, and they help inventors and owners in the intellectual property area. Mr. Page, the CEO of this company, Harry Page, came and he explained that his company employs some very extensive reverse engineering technologies, so-called forensic techniques, and they're used to help people identify instances where there is an infringement, help them prove that and to be able to enforce their intellectual property rights. The problem, of course, is that the digital lock measures in this bill will prevent that company from breaking a digital lock, even if it's placed on a device by someone who is pirating another company's hardware or software. Why would a government want to make it illegal for a company like UMB to break a digital lock to prove a theft, for example, on behalf of a client? That makes no sense. Why would they be aiding and abetting pirates, software pirates, for example? Why are they not protecting companies like UMB who have hundreds of employees and carry out this work on a global basis? Here's another practical example of the impact of this legislation. Campus Stores Canada came to testify. They are a major supplier of books in the academic settings across the country, colleges, CEGEPs, universities. They came and they testified, they said, well, you know, this is really going to have a negative impact on more than 100 vendor and supplier associates. Campus Stores Canada testified the new Copyright Act will increase the cost of Canadian textbooks by as much as 15%. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm blessed with 4 kids at home, 3 in college and university, and I can tell you my own kids struggle with the cost of textbooks. They work their part-time jobs, and they look hard. They search hard, long and hard for used textbooks, but often they're not available. They have to buy new textbooks every year. That's the way the teaching system works. It's hard for young people. Why, as Campus Stores testified, why would they want to bring this 15% increase on the over 1 million students that they serve? Well, of course, they don't want to do this. But that, of course, is another practical impact of what the government is pursuing. Here's a third example, and it was picked up on by my colleague just a moment ago when he read into the record some testimony from Professor Ian Hargreaves. Now, Professor Ian Hargreaves is not just another professor in the area of intellectual property. He was the person that conducted the definitive study in Britain last year on intellectual property, the #1 study in the United Kingdom. It's important for Canada to look to other jurisdictions to see how they've done it. comparatively. They're struggling with the same thing. And I want to re-emphasize what Professor Hargreaves said in committee in the last several days. And it's basically this, Madam Speaker, this notion that informs this bill, this legislation, which is something that the conservative movement has seized upon now in its present form for many, many years. It's about tougher enforcement. We're going to be tougher about enforcement. We often hear that, and we often ask questions like, why don't you want to be as tough on the causes of crime, for example, as you say you are on crime itself? Well, Professor Hargrave came to testify and said, you know, in the United Kingdom, where they do have a law in place which makes it unlawful to copy a song from a laptop to an MP3 player, he's basically saying now this is a big mistake. It has not worked in the United Kingdom, and he's gone on to say that, quote, the continued unlawfulness of copying a song from a laptop to an MP3 player is something which has not been tenable for really quite some time. The law, he went on to say, needs to be sensible. Sensible. The law he referred to as making reasonable sense to reasonable people. So we have a situation where the government, in full knowledge of other experience in other jurisdictions, is simply saying, we don't want to change this, we don't want to improve this. Perhaps they're motivated by such partisanship, Madam Speaker, that they can't take good amendments from other parties. That's very unfortunate if that's the case. Perhaps they're under inordinate pressure and undue influence from the United States, with a very powerful, very, very powerful entertainment industry. Perhaps they're under pressure from forces in Los Angeles and the Hollywood sector who are very, very worried about the growth of Canada's film industry, the success in Toronto and Vancouver, and the success in even like cities like my city here in Ottawa, where increasing numbers of films and recordings are being pursued. I don't know why. I don't know what the motivation is, Madam Speaker, but it's unfortunate that the government doesn't see fit to work with Parliament, right? That's why we come to work here every day. We come to work to improve things. So we have here a case where the definitive author of the biggest study in the United Kingdom in years came to testify to say, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So why don't we actually pursue another way? And that's why in our legislative amendments, Madam Speaker, we put forward a number of amendments to try to overcome these difficulties. So we ask again, why won't the government amend C11 to allow consumers to break a digital lock for personal use, for what we call non-infringing purposes? Why do you want to send a signal to Canadians that for the millions of them that actually do occasionally for personal use copy this kind of material, why are we saying to them, you better watch out, you're going to get hunted down? I mean, it sort of betrays, I'm not sure if it's an ignorance, Madam Speaker, or just an unwillingness to see where society is at. Maybe it's because I have 4 teenage kids who spend a lot of time doing creative work, listening to creative work, participating in creative work. It's now part and parcel of what they do in school. It's part and parcel of what they do in society. You know, seniors are increasingly turning to online solutions. Very many of the seniors in my own riding of Ottawa South are now doing online banking. They're now pursuing online entertainment searches. Some of them have mobility problems. Perhaps they're disabled. So I don't understand why the government has this pig-headedness, this hard-headedness about not wanting to improve the bill based on some of these practical issues that have been raised and practical solutions that have been preferred by both the UK experience and by parliamentarians here on the floor. So I'd just like to close, Madam Speaker, by saying it's important, yes, it's important to improve and modernize our Copyright Act. But it's not a serious venture when the government carbon copies the previous facsimile of it, brings it to the floor and says, here, do it again. We're not interested in improving this when there's goodwill and good faith to do so. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Longueuil. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Pierre-Boucher. Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to ask my colleague if he doesn't think that these reforms of the Copyright Act have parallels that we could draw with our American neighbours, where we're simply doing a cut and paste. We're copying the American vision to simply put a little sticker on it to say Canadian.
Ottawa South.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, we need to be very cautious and careful with respect to our American neighbors. They have their own interests, and we need to respect that. However, we can see that they've had a great deal of influence here. They've exerted a great deal of pressure on the government. We know recently that there are diplomatic cables showing that certain parts of the bill were drafted to simply please the U.S. industry, the industry in the United States, instead of addressing Canadian issues. So that's a situation we're facing. We have responsibilities as legislators here. We have our own industry to protect, our sector to protect. In Quebec, for example, there are producers, very famous creators, cinematographers, etc. Now, I'm not here to criticize U.S. society. No, they have their own interests. But it's unfortunate to see that so much pressure was brought to bear by the U.S. and it had such a great deal of influence here.
Pardon me, before I resume debate, there is still time for a couple more questions. I'm jumping the gun here. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's fully understandable. We've had some long days here. I'd like to thank the member for his comments on this bill. One of the issues in this bill is of direct concern to the people in my riding across Alberta. We have a wonderful university called Athabasca University where everybody learns online. And of course what they need to do is access materials online. Well, what this bill will do, where there's digital locks of material, is the students will have to self-destruct within 5 days, and the course materials have to be destroyed no more than 30 days. I'm wondering if the Honourable Member could speak to that and whether or not he thinks that there should be more accommodation. We want to protect creators. I myself have been an academic. We value the work of writers. But in the same time, we're trying to encourage those, particularly Aboriginal communities, isolated rural communities, to be able to beef up their skills. Surely there should be greater provision to support those people who are making an effort to further their education. They should be able to access that information for a longer time period.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I really want to thank the member for that question. When I first read these provisions in the bill, I was reminded of the famous beginning of the Mission Impossible series of films, where the Mission Impossible person is asked to take on a mission if he so agrees to do so, at the end of which, once he agrees, the tape self-destructs in 30 seconds. That's not how learning works, Madam Speaker. As a former university teacher, that's just not how it works. Young people today use information of this kind that's available online and elsewhere, and they learn in learning blocks, and they often have to return to foundational learning blocks to build on them to be able to make progress, particularly, Madam Speaker, in our trade sector, where information, when it comes to trade skills, learning skills that build one on the other, to provide a good workforce for our Canadian economy, that's just not realistic to ask them to destroy material in that kind of timeline. So it's again, not steeped in reality, and perhaps not even steeped in the real interests of Canadians.